They were laughing when it began. Not quiet laughter either, but full-throated, echoing guffaws that bounced around the interior of the orbiting ship like a bad joke that never died. 8 alien hunters, each from a different world, different species, all covered in polished chrome, bone armor, or adaptive cloaking skins, gathered around a hologram replaying Earth camouflage footage. One of them choked on his drink when he saw a human in full ghillie suit crawl into a puddle and vanish. He actually rolled onto the floor, clutching his stomach. Another mocked the human tactic of smearing mud on the face, mimicking it with slime from his own skin while the others roared. They called it primitive swamp dancing. The leader, General Krith, leaned in and paused the footage at the frame showing nothing but a patch of dirt. "This," he declared, voice thick with contempt, "is what passes for stealth on Earth." The room howled again. That was the hook the universe heard, a show of overconfidence broadcast live as a cosmic pay-per-view spectacle titled Earth's Final Hunt. A human was left in Sector 9 of the Amazonian kill zone, declared the last contestant in a galactic blood sport where hunters collect trophies from so-called savage worlds. Viewers from 13 solar clusters tuned in, bets placed, death clocks started. The mission? Kill him in under 15 minutes. That was hour 1. Down on the planet, everything was too quiet. The birds had gone. The breeze no longer rustled. Even the insects, normally buzzing in maddening harmony, seemed to have vanished. The jungle didn't breathe, it waited. And buried under a mess of vines, leaves, and thick rotting mulch, a pair of eyes opened. They didn't blink. They didn't shift. They simply watched. The man under the mud didn't move because movement was death. His name was Connor Grange. Once a soldier, once a ghost, now simply a man smeared in filth with a piece of sharpened rebar at his side and silence as his only ally. He had been left behind in the final planetary sweep, presumed dead after a transport explosion. When the transmission first began, when the aliens laughed, he heard it through the fractured remains of a calm receiver embedded in his helmet. He didn't flinch. He just smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. He knew the hunt had started. The aliens landed like gods. From a distance, it looked like divine judgment, 8 shimmering dropships crashing through the treetops like falling stars. Their arrogance burned through the air. They walked in perfect formation, scanners active, rifles humming with electromagnetic hums and plasma glow. They began fanning out, not bothering to whisper. "Thermal's negative," one of them hissed. "He's using primitive shielding," another scoffed. "Camouflage. How quaint." One of the hunters reached a small clearing, squinted at a puddle, then grunted. "He'll try to ambush. Like they always do." Then the puddle blinked. The hunter didn't see it. But the man under the surface had already marked him. Connor waited 37 minutes without moving a single joint, barely breathing. He'd coated his skin with river mud and lichen paste, dulling heat signature and smell. No tech. Just instinct. Just years in Afghanistan, jungles in Myanmar, and a dozen operations that never made the news. He didn't fight wars. He ended hunts. That's what he whispered to himself. Not as comfort. As a promise. The first alien died without making a sound. He stepped onto a tripwire that wasn't connected to a grenade or a gun. It simply triggered a cluster of vines to shift. And behind those vines was Connor, eyes open, hand raised. The sharpened rebar punched through the alien's throat with brutal efficiency. The body didn't fall, it was caught, lowered, buried in moss. When another hunter passed that spot moments later, he didn't even notice the absence. But the viewers did. The cosmic broadcast stuttered. The hunter count dropped from 8 to 7. No explanation. The camera never caught the kill. The laughter stopped. Back on the ship, General Krith frowned. "What was that?" he demanded. "Broadcast delay?" The technician stammered. "No, sir. Real-time feed. One is offline." Krith's smile flickered. "He was alone, unarmed. What, did he bite him to death?" Silence followed. No one laughed now. Down on the ground, the hunt shifted. Connor was no longer the prey. He was the ghost in the leaves, the thing under the mud, the nightmare that turned alien arrogance into cold sweat. Minutes passed. Then another signal dropped. This time, an explosion. An alien stepped into a hollowed-out log rigged with wasp nests and a broken power cell from a wrecked probe. The ensuing detonation shredded everything in a 10-meter radius. Half of the galaxy saw that one. The human had used their own technology as a trap. The crowd watching from space erupted. Some in awe. Others in disbelief. A few began to cheer. "Who is this human?" Someone posted in live commentary. "Is he a soldier? Is this staged? Why does he look like that?" Connor's face flashed briefly during the explosion footage. A pale, mud-caked visage with dead eyes and a faint grin. A viewer from the Velrac system wrote, "That's not camouflage. That's war paint." Earth's odds of survival shifted from 0.1% to 27%. Alien betting markets surged. On the ship, Krith issued full combat protocols. "No more games," he growled. "Burn the forest down if you must." "Sir," someone warned. "Our ratings are climbing." Krith snarled. "I'll wear his skull as a helmet." The next signal drop was unexpected. Not a kill. A signal hijack. One of the drones used for broadcasts began repeating a human voice. It wasn't a threat. It was a joke. A recording of Krith mocking Camouflage earlier, now looped and played over footage of the two dead aliens. A mockery of a mockery. Connor was using their own show as a weapon. Somewhere across the stars, a child laughed. In the jungle, Connor didn't move. He sat beneath a tree root, watching as panic settled into the movements of the remaining hunters. They stopped walking like kings. Now they stepped like prey. The jungle was no longer theirs. It was his. The man in the mud had become myth. One whispered to themselves in trembling fear. One not even satellites could track. Connor's eyes narrowed. He didn't care about broadcasts or ratings or alien politics. They came to Earth with weapons and cameras. He had mud and silence. They laughed at Camouflage. Soon they'd beg for shadows. And he still had 6 left. The jungle had turned quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was fear, thick and pulsing in the air like humidity before a storm. The remaining 6 hunters began to spread out more cautiously, no longer taunting each other, no longer mocking the mission. Their movements grew jittery, their formation fractured, and their confidence slipped with every step. They no longer walked with the swagger of apex predators but with the stiffness of men realizing the forest might eat them alive. Connor watched it all unfold from a shallow pit hidden beneath the roots of a collapsed tree. Every vibration, every broken branch, every change in the bird's rhythm told him where each alien moved. They were hunting like machines. That was their first mistake. Machines follow patterns. And he was raised in chaos. He moved like the mud itself, slow and seamless, crawling only inches at a time, pressing his body into the terrain until his heartbeat nearly matched the rhythm of the earth. The third alien came into view, helmet scanning, weapon glowing with a low hum that pulsed softly. This one was larger than the others, built like a tank and covered in armor that shimmered with reactive fibers, trying to blend with its surroundings. But the jungle hated technology. The armor made noise, reflecting the wrong shades of green, casting unnatural shadows. It made the alien look like a glitch in reality, and to Connor, that was all he needed. He had no gun, no plasma blade, no drone support. What he had was a sharpened piece of metal, a length of old cable, and a mind built for dismantling overconfidence. As the alien passed the collapsed tree, Connor triggered the snare he had set an hour before. A simple loop of cable, partially buried in soil, hidden beneath moss. It caught the alien's leg mid-step and yanked hard, pulling the massive hunter off balance. It wasn't enough to disable him, but it forced him to stumble into the direction Connor had hoped for. He hit the spike trap with full force. The rusted metal rods, covered in jungle rot and sharpened with a piece of river rock, didn't pierce the armor but bent just enough to push the chest plate aside, exposing a sliver of alien flesh near the shoulder. That was all Connor needed. He surged from the mud like a demon, driving the rebar into the gap. The alien shrieked, voice glitching through multiple languages before going silent. Connor didn't wait. He rolled the body into the trap, covered it with branches, and vanished again. The death wasn't broadcast this time. The alien's comms had been scrambled seconds before impact by a small EMP charge made from salvaged components, and one of the alien grenades he'd disarmed earlier. He was learning their tech. Fast. Up on the orbiting ship, Chris stared at the hunter tracker display in disbelief. One more signal gone. No body feed. No confirmation. Just offline. The feed was being watched by billions now, most expecting a fast reversal, a moment where the aliens would regroup and overwhelm their prey. But that wasn't happening. Every attempt to ping the fallen hunter's suit failed. It was as if the jungle swallowed him. Panic began to bloom among the hunters. One suggested regrouping. Another insisted on splitting into twos. Krith overrode them, ordering an aerial drone sweep, thermal scans, and radiation bursts. He didn't care about protocol anymore. He cared about making an example. The hunt had become a circus, and the crowd was laughing for the wrong reasons. On the jungle floor, Connor smiled without humor as the drones passed overhead. He had been preparing for this since his last breath was supposed to be taken. He activated a crude device built from their own scanner tech, forcing false heat signatures to appear dozens of meters away. The drones followed the bait, mistaking boiling pools and animal dens for human heat. Meanwhile, Connor moved beneath a layer of dead leaves, holding his breath for over 2 minutes as one of the hunters passed just above. The hunter paused, senses pinging. Connor lay still. His heart thudded once. Then again. He tightened his grip on the rock in his hand. No metal, no signature. Just stone and bone. The alien suddenly turned and vanished deeper into the forest. Not because he sensed Connor, but because something else had triggered his sensors. A signal. A broadcast. From a human source. But not Connor. It was old Earth military code, bleeding through the jungle like a whisper. Connor froze. That wasn't him. He hadn't sent anything. Which meant something he didn't expect. Someone or something else was still active. He followed the echo after the hunter left, tracing the signal backward, moving only when it rained to mask his sound. Hours passed. The sun shifted. And finally, he reached it. A wreckage. Mostly buried under vines and fungus. One of the original defense satellites from the orbital wars, dropped during the planetary evacuation. Broken, yes, but not dead. Its black box still pulsed. Not a distress signal. Not a trap. A beacon. He crawled inside the husk and found it. A military-grade AI drone core, partially active, trying to reboot. He recognized the model. It was obsolete by alien standards. But not to him. To him, it was a friend. He managed to splice into the system using parts he had taken from a fallen hunter's neurorig. The AI core flickered to life, its voice damaged but coherent enough to recognize him. It didn't remember much. But it remembered the war. It remembered Earth. And it remembered how to kill. Connor spent the next 2 hours interfacing with the system, mapping nearby terrain and connecting the drone to his network of traps. It was like waking up an old wolf and pointing it at fresh prey. Together, they rigged the nearby clearing with a sequence trap designed not to kill but to embarrass. The next alien that arrived was sprayed with a biological compound harvested from a plant that caused severe hallucinations. He screamed, firing at shadows, running through the forest in circles until he collapsed. Connor didn't even need to touch him. The jungle did the work. From the orbiting ship, the footage was horrific. The alien flailed, screaming in a dozen dialects, firing into the sky, tearing at his own helmet. Some thought it was staged. Others said Earth had unleashed a psychic weapon. The alien collapsed after 40 minutes of madness, his feed broadcasting every second to a galaxy that now watched with horror and fascination. Ratings skyrocketed. Betting lines crashed. And Krith broke his communicator in rage. 4 hunters remained. And now it wasn't about the mission. It was about survival. Connor lay back against a tree, listening to the distant scream fade. The mud hadn't just hidden him. It had become part of him. The earth was no longer his shield. It was his weapon. The aliens wanted sport. They found war. And he wasn't done yet. Not even close. The night dropped over the jungle like a lid sealing a pressure cooker. Heat clung to the skin like a wet sheet, and the only sounds were the croaks of things that had no name in any alien language. Above the canopy, the stars glared down like a jury. The remaining 4 hunters weren't sleeping. They weren't even resting. They were arguing. Not in whispers but in sharp bursts of angry speech that cut through the forest like blades. Connor could hear it from nearly 70 meters away, tucked into a hollow carved out by erosion and camouflaged with moss. He chewed slowly on a piece of dehydrated ration he had pulled from a crushed emergency pack days ago. It tasted like ash, but his grin said otherwise. The cracks were showing. Panic had started as a whisper. Now it was screaming through their formation. They had begun to question the leader. They had stopped using group formations. They walked too loudly. Too fast. Too afraid. And the jungle was listening. Connor didn't plan his next move like a soldier. He let it come like a hunter. One of the aliens, a wiry one with twitchy arms and optical implants that lit up whenever he scanned movement, had wandered toward the ravine near the old crash site. That one had started talking to himself in short, clipped phrases. Connor had seen it before in men who'd spent too long behind enemy lines. They started trying to explain things aloud. Like the sound of their voice could keep the silence away. But the jungle didn't care about explanations. The moment the alien stepped near the ravine, the ground gave slightly. Not a trap. Not yet. Connor wanted to see what fear looked like before he ended it. He moved just close enough to trigger a low-frequency rustle across the leaves behind the alien. The alien spun, eyes lighting up, scanner buzzing. But there was nothing. Just vines and shadows. He turned again. Connor sent another rock skittering across a patch of bark to his left. The alien swung again. Nothing. It took 5 minutes before the alien stopped trusting his tech. That was the goal. The moment he did, Connor moved. Not toward him but around him, sliding through the dirt with a patience that only came from years of crawling under fire. He circled the alien like a wolf, brushing trees, shifting leaves, triggering all the wrong instincts. The alien fired his weapon once, twice, then screamed into the trees. The shot echoed into the ravine, and the moment he looked down to check for a target, the edge gave out. He fell nearly 10 feet into a pit lined with sharp stone. He wasn't dead. Not yet. Connor didn't want him dead. Not until he understood. The alien lay at the bottom, legs shattered, trying to crawl with one arm as his weapon buzzed uselessly nearby. Connor approached slowly, not with a weapon but with a handful of wet mud. He dropped into the pit with no sound. The alien looked up and finally saw him. Not the human. The thing in the mud. The camouflage they had laughed at. It was real. It breathed. It stared. And it moved. Connor didn't speak. He smeared mud across the alien's face slowly, firmly, then walked away. He left the alien there to scream, not for pain but from the realization that they weren't the ones making the rules anymore. Hours later, the screams stopped. Not because of death. But because the alien had covered himself in mud. Trying to vanish. Trying to survive. On the ship above, Kritha's rage had turned cold. He no longer shouted. He no longer threatened the crew. He just stared at the feed. The galaxy was watching. And he was losing control of the narrative. The hunters were not gods. They were being dismantled like amateurs. Like prey. He sent a direct neural pulse to the remaining trio, ordering them to regroup immediately. But 2 of them didn't respond. The signal was active, but there was no reply. They were alive. Just not listening. Down below, those 2 had decided they didn't need Kritha's leadership anymore. One of them, a serpentine alien with razor limbs and a hatred for everything inefficient, declared that they should abandon the mission and escape. The other, stockier and covered in scaled armor, agreed in silence. They began to prep an extraction beacon, something that had been hidden in a secondary drop pod miles away. It wasn't authorized. But at this point, survival trumped pride. Connor found them during the signal burst. He didn't act immediately. He watched them bicker while trying to hack the beacon's code lock. One blamed the other for not taking the humans seriously. The other cursed Earth's terrain, Earth's air, Earth's mud. Connor smiled as he reached into his pouch and pulled out a small device, barely functional, half broken, made from parts he'd salvaged from a fallen helmet and the drone core. It emitted a single repeating sound. A heartbeat. He placed it beneath a leaf pile and retreated into the trees. The aliens paused mid-hack. The heartbeat echoed softly. The smaller one growled and fired into the trees. The sound kept repeating. The larger one shouted and stomped toward it. They uncovered the device. No threat. Just a pulse. Then it stopped. That's when the tripwires snapped. Dozens of jagged bone fragments, crafted from the first alien Connor had killed, launched outward from all directions. Not lethal, but brutal. One alien lost an eye. The other screamed as fragments embedded into his throat. Neither died instantly. But neither could move fast anymore. Connor approached hours later. Both were unconscious. He stripped their armor, took their tools, and left them tied in vines next to the activated beacon. A beacon they couldn't deactivate. It kept pinging their exact location to the sky. Connor left a message scratched into the bark of a tree nearby in one of Earth's oldest languages. It said nothing about surrender. Just one word. Run. When Chris saw the feed, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply activated the override on the last remaining hunter's neural cortex. The matriarch. She had been held back from the initial drop. A final measure. The perfect predator. Part machine, part organic, trained to kill anything that bled. She dropped silently from the sky hours later, landing in a crater of steam and light. She didn't laugh. She didn't mock. She began walking toward the jungle without speaking a word. And somewhere under the trees, Connor looked up and whispered to himself. Something he had not said in years. Finally, a worthy one. The mind games were over. The real hunt was about to begin. The rain fell harder now, like the sky was finally trying to drown the madness it had been watching for days. It soaked the jungle in thick sheets, turning the earth into slush and the air into fog. Thunder rolled above like distant cannon fire, but down below it was silent. Not even the birds dared to cry. Connor crouched under a twisted arch of roots, his eyes fixed on the tracks in the mud. They were heavier, deeper than the others, moving with a strange rhythm. Precise. Calculated. She had arrived. He felt it like an ache behind his ribs. The last hunter was not just another killer. She was bred for this. Every movement from her was without hesitation. No panic. No missteps. Just purpose. And unlike the others, she wasn't here to play. She was here to finish. He had watched her drop from orbit through the clouds like a silent thunderbolt, no fanfare, no entourage. Just one smooth descent and a cloud of steam. The jungle seemed to bow around her steps. He didn't need to see her to feel the shift. The air had changed. It was colder, tighter. She moved like something that had studied human muscle memory, then perfected it. For the first time, Connor didn't move toward his trap lines. He moved away from them. She wouldn't fall for his old games. She had watched the footage. Studied the patterns. He knew that if he repeated himself, she'd use it against him. So he improvised. He began undoing every trap he'd laid, not to clear the field but to make her wonder why. He wanted her thinking. Not charging. Because once she paused to question, he had a chance. 2 hours passed with no visual. He moved from tree to tree, mud smeared freshly across his body, leaves stitched into the fabric of his clothes. He'd stopped being a soldier days ago. Now he was the jungle. But she was something else entirely. She didn't just pass through terrain. She erased it. He found one of the old vine traps he had made near the southern ridge completely dismantled, piece by piece, nothing broken. Just disarmed. Like she was leaving a message. I'm not like them. He moved more carefully after that. No more quick shifts or branch climbs. He began mapping her trail, watching for the smallest changes. He saw only 2 sets of prints. Hers and his own. She was always just behind him. Always a few minutes delayed. But never more. He could feel her closing in. Then came the voice. Not in the trees. Not from any machine. It came through the air, real and human. It was a woman's voice, calm, firm, the kind you'd hear giving orders on a battlefield. It spoke only once. You know how this ends. He froze. It wasn't just mimicry. It was fluent, nuanced, grounded in tone and context. She had studied his language, his cadence. Maybe even his past. The idea crept into him like a chill. She wasn't tracking him. She was profiling him. His tactics. His habits. His decisions. She had been hunting him long before she ever landed. Connor retreated to a ravine he hadn't used before, one too dangerous for previous movement but now necessary. He crossed it by climbing under a fallen tree and swimming half submerged in the current. He left no trail, no heat, no sound. If she wanted him, she'd have to come through the mud. He set a silent perimeter using the alien proximity mines he had scavenged earlier, buried them shallow, and marked the area with false trails. Then he waited. Rain soaked through his layers. He didn't care. Hours passed. She arrived in complete silence. No rustle. No sound of breath. She simply appeared like a shadow stepping out of fog. She didn't walk into the traps. She skirted them as if she had drawn the map herself. Her face was covered in a mirrored mask, featureless except for 2 slits of red light that glowed faintly in the mist. She stood across from him, 20 meters away, unmoving. Connor did not raise his weapon. She did not raise hers. They stared at each other through the storm. She tilted her head slightly, then reached up and pressed a small panel on her armor. A projection formed between them. It showed footage. Connor's footage. From his past. Missions. Engagements. Video feeds that had never been broadcast. She had been watching for longer than he imagined. Then came the offer. She spoke again, this time through the projection, using his own voice. A perfect imitation. She offered alliance. Not surrender. Collaboration. She said he had proved himself worthy of something greater. That the hunt was not about conquest, but recruitment. She asked him to come with her. Not as a prisoner. As a commander. Connor stared at the projection, unmoving. He thought of the others. The dead. The mutilated. The ones who laughed. He thought of the mud and the silence, and the message he had carved into the tree. Run. Then he looked up and simply said no. The jungle erupted. One of the proximity mines went off as she shifted, faster than any living thing should move. She didn't dodge. She redirected the explosion with a shield pulse, closed the gap in seconds, and tackled him into the ravine. The water swallowed them both, and the current dragged them downstream, slamming into rocks and roots. They fought in the water, submerged and choking, hands clawing for leverage. She was stronger. But he was desperate. He jammed his fingers into the seams of her armor, pried loose a panel, and drove a jagged rock into the exposed circuit beneath her collar. Sparks exploded. She howled not in pain but in anger. He used the moment to push her head underwater, held it there until her flailing turned into stillness. Then he pulled back, gasping, falling onto the bank. She floated motionless, armor sparking, the rain hissing on her mask. He crawled to her, half dead, and reached for her helmet. It came off with a hiss. And beneath it was not a face. It was a reflection. His own face. Scarred. Mud-covered. Burned. But it was him. She had copied him entirely. Not just physically. Mentally. She had been trained to become him. The shock was like a punch to the chest. He stumbled back. She opened her eyes. Red. Burning. And spoke again, this time not in mimicry. In rage. You are not unique. You are a prototype. Then her body shut down. Completely. He waited, watching for movement. There was none. The rain kept falling. He didn't know what she meant. But he knew one thing. He hadn't just survived a hunter. He had fought a version of himself. And whatever program had built her was still out there. Still watching. Still planning. He dragged her body out of the water and buried it beneath a collapsed tree. Not as a grave. As a warning. He carved one last word into the bark above it. Evolve. Then he vanished into the jungle again, where the rain swallowed all sound and the hunt never truly ended. Connor didn't sleep that night. He sat beneath a wall of roots, legs drawn up, weapon balanced across his knees, eyes wide open but unfocused. The jungle didn't speak to him anymore. It listened. Something about the confrontation had shifted the ground beneath his thoughts. The hunter he had buried wasn't just an enemy. She was a mirror, a deliberate reflection built with malice and precision. And someone, somewhere, had crafted her to study him. That thought curled around his chest like a slow squeeze. He had fought invaders, killers, monsters. But now, he had fought himself. And she had nearly won. Every choice he had made, every tactic, every retreat and trap had been part of a profile. She had anticipated them all. And still he had survived. But survival wasn't victory. Not yet. There was still one left. Krith. The one who had started all this. The one who still watched. Above the canopy, the flagship floated like a silent moon, its surface bristling with scanners, eyes, and weapons. Krith had stopped broadcasting the hunt to the public. The feed had gone dark 2 hours after the matriarch vanished. No more betting pools. No more entertainment. He was no longer chasing ratings. He was chasing revenge. And he wanted it personal. Alone in the command chamber, Krith stood in front of the last live feed from the jungle, a blurry thermal overlay that pulsed faintly every few seconds. No one else was with him. The crew had been dismissed. The spectators silenced. All that remained was the hunt. He reached into the vault beneath the console and removed something sealed in black casing. A combat drop pod. Personal. Custom. A gift he had never unwrapped because he believed he would never need it. But now he needed everything. The pod screamed through the clouds like a curse. It struck the ground with a force that sent birds flying and trees bending. Connor heard it before he saw it. A sound different from all others. No caution. No precision. Just fury. He moved fast, ducking through vines and cutting a trail straight toward the impact zone. The earth still smoked from the crash. The pod was buried half deep in a crater, steam hissing from its edges. Connor crouched beneath a ridge and waited. The hatch opened. Krith stepped out. No armor. No cloak. Just layered combat cloth and weapons carved from bone, steel, and plasma. His face was exposed, gray skin pulled tight across high cheekbones, eyes black and boiling with rage. He didn't scan. He didn't speak. He simply began walking forward. Connor didn't strike immediately. He wanted to see how Krith moved. It was strange watching the architect of so much arrogance walk through the jungle without hesitation, without checking his corners or covering his back. It was either madness or supreme confidence. Maybe both. Connor followed. Every footstep Krith took seemed to shake the ground. He wasn't stalking prey. He was drawing it out. He wanted Connor to come to him. And eventually he did. The final confrontation happened in a clearing left behind by an old skirmish days earlier. Scorched trees, broken branches, and pieces of alien armor lay scattered across the ground. Krith stood in the center, hands empty. No weapons. Just waiting. Connor stepped out from behind a half-burned stump, silent as a ghost. They looked at each other, two shapes cut from war. Then Krith spoke. He said the galaxy had watched Connor become legend, but that legends were fragile things. That no matter how many he killed, Earth had already lost. That humans were now symbols of defiance, not power. And symbols were meant to be broken. Connor said nothing. He dropped his weapon, walked into the circle, and began to fight. The brawl was not elegant. It was not beautiful. It was raw, brutal, animalistic. Every strike was meant to break bone, tear flesh, or silence breath. Krith fought like a war god, all crushing elbows and snapping knees, spinning strikes that sent Connor reeling into the mud. Connor fought like a survivor, grappling, biting, dragging the fight into the dirt where pain meant nothing and leverage was everything. They slammed into tree trunks, tore through fallen branches, left blood smears across the ground that soaked quickly into the earth. Krith was stronger. Connor was faster. Neither gave ground. At one point, Krith had him pinned against a stone, choking him with one hand while lifting a jagged blade with the other. He hissed something in a language Connor didn't understand. But the tone said everything. This is the end. Connor's hand scraped the ground, fingers closing around something sharp. A splintered fragment of his old trap. He jabbed it into Krith's side, not deep enough to kill, but just enough to make him flinch. Then he rolled, broke the hold, and slammed Krith's face into the stone. Blood sprayed. Krith staggered back, laughing. It wasn't the laughter from the ship. It was real now. Wild. Cracked. Desperate. Krith said he hadn't come to win. He had come to make sure Connor never walked again. That even if he died, the jungle would mark Connor forever. That he would never be able to crawl back into obscurity. That they would come. Others. Worse than him. And Connor would always be hunted. Always remembered. Connor grabbed him by the throat and said he hoped they did. Then he drove the blade into Krith's chest. The alien gasped once. Then fell. No broadcast. No cameras. Just the mud and the silence. Connor stood there, shaking, not from pain but from everything finally catching up to him. His knees buckled. He sank down beside the body and closed his eyes. Rain began to fall again, slow at first, then faster. Washing the blood. Cooling the fire. He sat like that for a long time, not thinking, not planning. Just breathing. When he finally moved, it wasn't to run. It was to drag Krith's body to the edge of the ravine and throw it in. He left no marker. No message. Just absence. Then he walked deeper into the forest. Not to hide. But to disappear. He knew the galaxy wouldn't forget. That somewhere, someone would whisper about the man in the mud. About the hunt that became a war. About the creature who turned camouflage into a curse. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them fear. He would be waiting. In the silence. In the shadows. In the place where hunters come to die. Ask ChatGPT. Far above the jungle, orbiting in silence, the flagship remained suspended like a monument to arrogance. Its decks were empty now, corridors still echoing with the ghost of laughter that once rang through them. No voices spoke, no orders barked. The command chamber flickered with dim light, unattended, as dust began to gather on consoles meant to record glory. All signals from the ground had gone dark. No feed. No updates. No triumphant return. Only absence. The hunters were gone. All of them. The broadcast that had once drawn billions of viewers across galaxies ended with a flicker and a single static frame. A human covered in mud, walking away through the rain. No commentary. No explanation. Just the image of defeat. Some called it sabotage. Others called it art. And a few whispered it was a warning. On the communication hubs of far-off systems, debates erupted. There were those who refused to believe that the great alien hunters, trained across generations, had fallen to a single man with no armor, no advanced weaponry, no fleet at his back. They blamed interference, natural hazards, and bad intel. But then came the footage. Not from the original broadcast, but from fragments recovered by scavenger drones who swept the region days later. Short bursts of raw feed showing traps made from bones and vines, weapons improvised from shattered armor, and the face of the final hunter lying broken beside a blood-slicked stone. No dramatic angles, no scripted endings. Just real violence. Real mud. Real silence. And real victory. The galaxy watched again, but now in quiet. Students at military academies paused training to study Connor's methods. Simulations were built to test his movement patterns, only to find them unpredictable. Behavioral algorithms failed to pin down his strategy. They called it the Grange Loop, a sequence of erratic survival logic that confused both AI and living tacticians. Defense analysts from advanced civilizations began referring to Earth not as a primitive world, but a high-risk zone. The hunting league that had once sanctioned the expedition to Earth went underground, its leaders vanishing without statement. Rumors swirled. That Earth had declared war. That humanity had sent a message. That somewhere in the jungle, a new kind of threat had been born. In one such rumor, a drone captured an image from low orbit. A clearing deep in the Amazon, marked by 12 makeshift grave mounds, each formed from scavenged pieces of alien armor. At the center of the graves, a symbol was drawn into the dirt with a stick. A simple human handprint, pressed in mud, fingers splayed wide. The image was classified by 3 different governments before it leaked. Within days, it was painted on walls, flags, and weapons across dozens of colonies. The symbol of the last man standing. No official body ever confirmed what happened. Earth's surviving governments, fractured and isolated, denied knowledge of the event. The broadcast had been banned on all major data channels, though bootleg copies continued to circulate. One short clip showed Connor standing beside a downed tree, head tilted upward, rain washing streaks of blood and soil from his face. He looked directly into a damaged drone camera and said 5 words before the signal cut out. Not hiding. Not hunted. Just ready. Across distant planets, children painted their faces with mud before play. Soldiers began studying guerrilla tactics rooted in Earth warfare. Alien generals hesitated before approving future incursions. The idea of Earth shifted in the minds of millions. Not a backward, soft world, but a crucible. A place where failure meant death and arrogance was the fastest way to die. Some cultures began calling Connor the Mud Ghost. Others referred to him as the Final Hunter. The name didn't matter. What mattered was the story. And stories have a way of growing. Some say he died shortly after the last fight, wounds too deep to survive. Others say he walked still, deeper in the jungle than any drone can scan, his heart beating in sync with the rain. One tale describes a group of poachers who vanished near the old impact crater. They were never found. Only their vehicle remained, and beside it, a single print in the mud. Too wide to be a man's. Too clean to be an accident. A few claim he had joined with the remains of Earth's forgotten AI systems, forming a network hidden beneath the forest, pulsing silently, waiting for another drop pod to fall. A new kind of defense grid, built not from satellites, but from roots and stone and memory. On one of the moons of the Verithian system, a young alien cadet training in jungle warfare smeared mud across his face in a traditional drill. His instructor asked him why. The cadet said he was honoring the human. The one who turned camouflage into vengeance. The instructor scolded him. Told him the story was exaggerated, the man just lucky. But the cadet smiled and said luck doesn't make 13 hunters vanish. Luck doesn't rewrite fear. And mud doesn't laugh, but it never forgets. On a colony station above the rings of Gallus Prime, a group of military historians met to archive war data. One entered the chamber with a new file. A simple one. No formal classification, no tactical breakdown. Just a title. Earth, the Jungle War. And beneath it, a single entry. Connor Grange. Status unknown. Outcome decisive. Threat level high. One of the historians read it and asked what happened to the body. The one who brought the file shrugged. They never found one. The body never mattered. What mattered was the silence that came after. Somewhere, beneath layers of forest that will never be mapped, a man sleeps under the roots of a dead tree. His skin is painted in earth, his breath shallow, His weapons rusted but within reach. Around him, the jungle pulses. Not loudly. Not fast. But steady. He dreams without images. Only sensations. Rain. Heat. The memory of movement. And the unending stillness of something watching. A leaf falls near his cheek. He doesn't move. Somewhere above, a new drone passes through the clouds. Its scanners blink once. Then fail. The last man in the mud does not rise. He does not greet. He does not run. He waits. Because in the end, all hunters return. And the jungle never forgets where it buried its teeth.